Hello, I'm Alka. I work for Save the Children, and today we are discussing a topic, comprehensive school safety. This indeed a very new topic which is being introduced to the school system this year on request of National Disaster Management Authority. The Government of India has now shown its interest in making students aware about the entire comprehensive school safety and around children, the entire environment, which includes teachers, parents, communities, and the governance structures, the leaders, should also be aware about it. So today we are discussing the very framework which is to be introduced in the schools for every single child to know what safety means for them, and how should they protect themselves, safeguard themselves in the first go. Let's start by looking at this picture. What do you see here? We see that a child, though, is protected by the environment, the family and the teachers and the school system, but it's not that everything is as perfect as we think. How is the journey from home to school and school to home back? If you look at this picture, you see we do encounter overcrowded scooter rides in the morning, and after school hours we do see bridges which are shaky and not so safe for kids to walk on. We do see waterlogged areas wherein children are supposed to cross drains or waterlogged rivers or areas to reach schools. We do see overcrowded rickshaws or autos, and even some self-made arrangements like this tire tube to reach the other side of the river to be there in school. And all of these are risk which is put to children, and they take it almost every day to reach their schools and meet with their friends and the teachers. Is this okay? Let me say that it's not okay, and that's why it's important that we talk about comprehensive school safety here. And it's very important for all teachers to not teach this as only a subject matter, but as a knowledge which is to be practiced by everyone, which includes students at the first go and also families and the school authorities. So to be precise, if we look back and see some of the examples wherein school safety was talked in a big way, the risk that children face in school premises were discussed nationally and internationally, I would just discuss some of the examples which have happened in India which created headlines in the newspapers. There were 971 students who were seriously injured, and 31 students even died when there was a fire accident in a school in Kumbakonam. Similarly, in 1884 school buildings had collapsed during Bhuj earthquake. Similarly, 11,761 school buildings were totally damaged in this earthquake. We also have seen that in Kutch earthquake, there were around 300 children who lost their lives. Not only that, there had been accidents when there were Republic Day or any procession taken up by school wherein large number of children had walked. To name some, on 23rd of December 1995, nearly 425 children had died, wherein the building had collapsed while children were walking on a narrow lane. Now, if we see that where does a child spend most of their hours in a day, they spend it there in the school premises. And in our childhood, if we look back, most of the times and the years of our lives is what we spend in our schools. So isn't it important that we talk about this very special place wherein we spend so much of time and so much of years of our life to be safe? In two forms: one, the infrastructure, and B, the entire environment of the school. Both needs to be safe. Also, we have seen that any disasters which have happened, be it floods, cyclones, earthquakes, fire, other stampede and accidents, schools have been the first who have bared this brunt of the casualty. So let's talk about how the seriousness has come in from the international level, which now has reached the national and is now reaching the entire state in a cascade way to districts and schools on a priority. So we would look at the Shanghai meeting which happened of all United Nations countries in 2015, and therein in 2015 a framework was decided for 15 years which runs from 2015 till 2030, and we call it UN Shanghai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Now, in that meeting, wherein UN country members had participated, had put 4 priorities before them. They thought that it's very important that all of us, we as civil society organizations, we as citizens of the country, and we as citizens of this global nation, we must understand what are disaster risk. So first thing, after we understand or have a knowledge or an understanding of the disaster risk, it's also important that entire risk governance, which is around managing disasters, should be strengthened. This is going to manage the disaster risk, which we now, after priority 1, would understand. Priority 3 emerged to be investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. It's not that we need to respond to emergencies when a disaster strikes, but there has to be some preparedness well in advance. We call that disaster risk reduction, and that actually is meant to build resilience, which is empowering or strengthening the communities and the people to tackle disasters in a better way. So priority 3 said that invest in this DRR for resilience. Priority 4 talked about enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response, which means that when we talk about preparations, it should not be only a knowledge which should stay in the training modules or in the books, but it should be practiced. We would see some of the things which can be practiced, just as, let me mention that when there is a war, we see our army and the defense forces get into action, but it's not that they get into action the very same day of the war, but they prepare for it well in advance with arms and ammunition, with tricks and with exercise drills. They do it. Similarly, when we are talking about managing a disaster or being prepared to tackle a disaster, let's see what does it need in terms of preparation for it. And also we call it build back better, which means we are not talking about only the disaster time, but before it, what all has to be done in terms of preparedness. And during disaster, we talk about recovery, rehabilitation. Post disaster, we must see of the reconstruction, that it's done in a very holistic way. So to sum up, these are 4 priorities which were agreed by all UN member countries during the UN Shanghai meeting, and we thought that these 4 priorities will be implemented, executed between 2015 to 2030 to make the communities more resilient and more prepared to to tackle the disasters. There was one very important thing or a statement which was agreed during the UN Shanghai meet, and that actually focused on school safety, and it talked about comprehensive school safety as one component which should be cascaded to all levels. Let me read that statement for you. It says, children and youth are agents of change and should be given the space and modalities to contribute to disaster risk reduction in accordance with legislation, national practice and educational curricula. Now this is put at page number 23 of the entire Shanghai framework for disaster risk reduction. If we look at it, what does it say? It says that when we talk about comprehensive school safety, it's not only the people who are around, but keeping the child at the center, the child and the youth at the center. Let us develop this knowledge product which is closest to them. So children are not going to read policy documents. They are not going to see what's written in the schemes for them. They are not going to see what district budget or the plan talks about them. They are going to read the textbooks. So let's put what disaster risk reduction is and the knowledge around it in the textbook which is closest to the children, which they read and which stays with them in form of knowledge for their entire life. This was one of the reasons that comprehensive school safety now by some of the states, let me name a few like Assam, and now government of Andhra Pradesh have taken this up on priority to write a curriculum, a chapter which would go into the textbooks of children and which aims at making children aware about the entire comprehensive school safety. What is this going to aim? The broad goals of this entire comprehensive school safety are around 4 pillars. Pillar 1 is protect learners. So whosoever gets to know what comprehensive school safety is will be able to protect themselves and the education workers from what? From death, injury and harms in the school. Second is to plan for educational continuity in the face of all expected hazards and threats, including everyday risk. It's not that we are not facing risk. We are aware about it. It's just that we ignore many of it. If we take those into consideration, we ourselves can protect, and we also can set the path to protect others from those everyday risks which otherwise are just ignored by one and all. Third is to safeguard education sector investments. There are investments we see on the infrastructure, but are boundary walls considered? Are electric fitting safe or not safe being seen and maintained on timely basis? Is water point being seen if it's safe for children or not? So many of the infrastructural investments which goes into our education sector needs to be re-seen. Not only the infrastructure but also the knowledge, like this chapter coming into the school books is one of those investments that we would be talking about to safeguard children and their environment around disasters. Fourth, and the most important one, is to strengthen risk reduction and resilience through education. The entire risk reduction in form of knowledge is to be practiced, and is to be practiced by children, by teachers, by their peers, by the community, by the panchayats and by the local leaders. If everyone practices it, then we would be better prepared to manage any disasters that happens, and also the daily risk which poses a threat on children while they reach school or when they are there into the school. If you look at it, the entire framework when we are talking about comprehensive school safety, it actually is around three things. First, we would talk about what are some safe learning facilities. So that builds this fundamental understanding of comprehensive school safety. Second is about school disaster management. This is pillar number 2. And pillar number 3 is about risk reduction and resilience education. In all of this Venn diagram that you see on your screens, what we see that there would be multi-hazard risk assessment that will happen around these three sectors, around facilities, around management and around education. And whatever this multi-hazard risk assessment says would be developed into a module which reaches children in making them understand and put things into practice. To introduce this comprehensive school safety to you, the education sector policies and plans are the foremost or the first things to be discussed. Now the same three pillars which we have just discussed, which is school safe learning facilities, school disaster management and risk reduction and resilience education. Now around these three pillars that we are talking, there are multi-hazard risk assessment which can be done as an exercise, there are education sector analysis which has to happen, and there are some child-centered assessment and planning. When we think about school safety, we largely think about the transport, we think about the school building, we think about the infrastructural facilities, but we do not consider every time that what a child goes through, what a child puts as a risk. Maybe it's not about infrastructure, but maybe it's about corporal punishment. So a child has to be kept at the center when we do this assessment and when we do this planning. Also, building maintenance, it's not one-time investment that should go, but it should be something which should be done on a continuous basis. Many non-structural mitigations, we will be talking about this in detail in the later slides. Fire safety. All of these three things comes into pillar 1 and pillar 2 together. So we have talked about structural safety education, and we have also talked about construction as educational opportunities. These two things are more around infrastructure that's required to safeguard children in the school premises. Last but not the least, we also talk about household disaster plan, family reunification plan and the school drills. All put together comes as some of the tasks or some of the activities which are to be put at the school level, which are also to be put at the community level to ensure that children feel safe in school and while coming or leaving the school to their homes. Now we see that all of this are not only to be talked about only in the school, but if we want to refer some of the plans which shows the seriousness of the subject, we see that now national plans have it. We also see that sub-national plan and the local disaster management plans also have it. Let me refer to a few disaster management plan. If we know that how planning starts from bottom to up in India. So we have a village plans for any of the topics that we think is important. Take education, take health, take governance, women empowerment. For all of this, the planning starts at the village level, which gets consolidated at block and then at the district level, which then contributes to our state and national plan. Similarly, now villages, all villages in India have a village disaster management committees. Now these village disaster management committees consolidates all disasters that they see and all risk that they see should be put as one plan for the village. This one would be called the local disaster management plan. Now this local management plan then goes further and contributes to the sub-national and then to the national plan. The very first thing that has happened in the state of Andhra Pradesh is now they are introducing a comprehensive school safety by collaboration, which is that they have invited the subject experts to come and do this chapter, which would be the framework around comprehensive school safety. This chapter is being written by Save the Children as subject expert, SERT as it anchors the entire chapter, how should it be written and nothing get missed out, and school education department is leading on it. Andhra Pradesh is one of the first state which is not only doing this comprehensive school safety chapter as talks of only disaster management, but now they have taken this up beyond disasters which are only through natural disasters. So let us see that what this framework has. This framework talks about, let's put any title around comprehensive school safety. We'll be seeing these topics in the later slides, and then put one paragraph in the very beginning where there should be a thought-provoking or a mind mapping exercise, wherein it should be put a curiosity in the child to understand what are we talking about, and then many questions to which there would be answers in the chapter. So a thought-provoking or a mind mapping exercise is what we are beginning with. After this, there has to be a detailed case study, an incident or an experience. Like in the very beginning of this session, we had seen some photographs. When we talk about safety, what kind of daily risk or disaster risk that a child faces even in reaching the school or coming back to the home. So similarly, in the chapter itself, there are some case studies, incidences or experiences which would be put to set up the entire context. After that, there is some analytical study and insights. What are we talking about school safety? And under school safety, what is that particular topic that we have picked up? For the topic that has been picked up, there would be some elaborated data that comes in, and also the insight which would lead to some of the solutions which should come from the children, which should come from the discussion that happens between a teacher and the child. Also handling procedure before, during, after. When we are talking about disaster, let's also talk about the 3 phases which concerns a disaster and how can those be managed. These disasters need not be only cyclone or a natural one. These also can be a man-made or daily risk that is faced by a child. Then there has to be some skills, activities, mock drills to disseminate the message. Let's not make it as boring as reading a context of an incident which has happened 100 years back. This is something which a child may face every day and which a child may see that, oh, if this happens, I need to be prepared in this manner. So all of this has to be done maybe in form of an activity, maybe in form of a mock drill, so that the message is disseminated very effectively and it stays with the child. Whenever such a situation occurs, a child should quickly relate and act on it, and always keep a scope of knowing more about it, which can be in the form of discussion between the teacher and the student, and it can also be as a group discussion between the students themselves, so as to know more on information which they want to know. And then there has to be a suggested action plan If we understand something and if something like that stucks us, what is that one thing that the child proposes that they would take up? And all of these are now put into 3 categories. Some of the topics can actually go into the school disaster management, wherein it can be put into the plan. We can talk about infrastructure, campus, fittings, teachers' attitude, corporal punishment, many of it which can go into the school disaster management plan. Some of the categories like handling procedure before, during, after can actually go into safe learning facilities. And the last 3 categories, which is around skills, having more information or suggested action plan, can go into the risk reduction or a resilience education classification category. So all of these categories put together should have something to act upon. Education safe from disaster topic, which is, are we talking about education as education or education on the safety? What are some of those points which a child should understand? A child should clearly understand what do we mean by safe facility, what do we mean by school disaster management, what do we mean by risk reduction and resilience. Along with these 3 topics which a child must understand in detail, we must also talk about what leadership is, what analysis is, and what are some of the funding and growth points from where we could see the resources coming in. So all of these 3 things are to be talked in detail with a child for knowledge, which must lead to some practice. Some of the key processes and activities are, there has to be some sensitization which should happen on disaster risk reduction to mothers group, to children's group, and to child protection committees or child resource centers. Now when we are talking about how should those 3 topics which we have just seen in the previous slide should be taken to the children, it can be taken up as a classroom process wherein a teacher can talk about it and a child understands that what disaster management plan is, what do we mean by risk reduction. It can also be done beyond classroom session, which means when there is a parents meeting, we can talk about the disasters and the school safety points, which should be in the form of sensitization. When we do those awareness rallies, we don't talk everything in detail, but we discuss the top lines. So here is an opportunity where the top lines can be discussed with the parents, which should be concerning them about their own child's protection and safety when they go to school, when they spend their entire day into the school, and when they return back to the homes. It can also be put as a topic to the children's group where children can map the daily risk that they see, that they face, and what kind of protection measures would they suggest. Maybe this suggestions or the recommendation part can be done along with the teacher, but the discussion, let it come from the child. What are some of those daily risks and some of those regular frequent risks that they see in the school or while reaching the school. Now all of this risk assessment, which can be done at the community level wherein we are discussing it with the parents, and should also be done at the school level when we are discussing it with the children's group. So that's next phase to it. When 2 phases are done, then this entire school safety and family preparedness and resilience planning should be put together. Now all the recommendations which have come from the parent side or which have come through the discussions which children are having with the teachers or children are having with their own group should be documented very nicely. Now this becomes your school safety plan, which has both the components, the community component and also the school premises component. The school safety portions can be put into practice. And when we do it into the practice, we have to do it through mock drills. Say children say that when a school gate opens, there is a situation like stampede where they don't feel safe. So when a school gate opens, there has to be discipline, wherein children walk properly and enter the school premises. There isn't any risk of a stampede. How can this be done? So if this is what is mapped out by children during the school safety talk, or if this is what parents are put as a concern, put it as a mock drill. when children should do it as an activity, that when a school gate opens and many children are waiting outside to enter the school premises, how can this be done safely? So maybe a mock drill can be prepared around entering the school safely. Similarly, there is an incidence of, say, fire in the school buildings, how that entire evacuation should be planned. So this of course can be discussed into the children's group. This also should be talked amongst the teachers and the school administration and also with the parents, but this entire exercise needs to be put into a mock drill where children and teachers, school authorities should practically do it and understand that this is how evacuation would happen if any unforeseen incidents happens into the school premises. Similarly, we see that there are formations of urban response and task force and capacity building. You must have noticed by now that I am referring again and again to rural, panchayats, village disaster management plans, and it's not that disasters are meant only for villages, are only meant for rural areas. This can even happen in the urban areas. We see our school buildings in urban areas where it's in congested lanes, where the staircases are very, very narrow. We see many buildings all together, and this entire evacuation part becomes even more riskier. So let's also see that in the urban response also we have a task force and we have a capacity building exercises taken up in form of mock drills. We must also see that entire thing, because in a school what happens, maybe there are 10 teachers but there are 300 children who are to be evacuated if a risk or if a disaster happens. So keep everything around children, because it's children who first have to understand that it's about their own safety, and whatever they have learned in the books is now to be practiced, because it's their own life, it's their own risk which they are managing. So for this entire exercise, keep children at the center. Entire approach has to be that way, and build evidences that it's best only when a child is kept at the focus. Risk is nothing but any hazard that we see. Into how do we see that hazard makes the person vulnerable, and above it, to manage that hazard and to manage that vulnerability, how is our capacity? Let me elaborate on this point. The risk is higher if there is a hazard, say a fire breaking, and if there are disabled children, if there are children who are of very, very young age and are to be evacuated, that puts vulnerability around that particular section. Now in scene of hazard and in scene of vulnerability, if we do not have capacity, if we do not have an evacuation plan, the risk is higher. The risk can be minimized if there is a hazard but vulnerability are lesser. Even in scene of a vulnerability, our capacities are better to manage the risk. So risk is lower. So we just understood how can, with capacity, we can lower the higher risk part to a lower risk. Now let's also see what kind of risk are we talking about. Risk can be natural. We all know cyclones, floods, rains, earthquakes. We have just seen a few examples. We also know that there can be an economic risk, wherein there is a big financial loss at the family level or at the country level, and the entire risk is then translated, which affects every single citizen. There can be a political risk, there can be a technological risk, a social risk, or a physical risk. All of risk put together will actually form hazards or will form vulnerabilities more if we have a lesser capacity. Let me sum up here with the points that we have learned here. We have learned that what is comprehensive school safety. We have tried to understand what are some of the hazards or the risk which happens on the daily basis or which happens on disaster scene, as a disaster scene. We also have tried to understand that what are some of those ways wherein we can act, and how important it is to understand that as a knowledge and also to put that as an activity, to practice it, say in form of a mock drill, so that we are better prepared to meet with any disaster, to tackle it. We also have seen how with built capacities we can lower risk in any form of hazards that can happen. We have also learned it can be in many ways, the capacities that we are talking about. It can be in an individual way, group way, or a community way. It can also go in an institution way. So all of these will make the communities, will make the children understand and practice better methods when they address any risk or any disasters.